Welcome back to the Fourth Way Podcast. We just finished up a season on the topic of simplicity. And when I say that we finished it up, I don't mean that we exhausted the topic at all by any means. With any of the seasons that I have done so far, you could have so much more to say about it. And there's so many different facets to each season that I've done that you could really spend seasons on multiple facets of each of those seasons and never exhaust the topics, of course. So, but I think that the season on simplicity, it kind of gave you a good overview of the concept of simplicity and complexity, the value of it, and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to extend this season a little bit by giving you some insights into works from other people who have written pertinent to the topic of simplicity. And so the first work is that we're going to start this week is going to be from Eller, and it is directly related to simplicity. But the other two works that I'm going to choose, one of them is also by Eller. I just find him very valuable, and he just so happens to cover the topic that I wanted to cover. And then another author after that as well. They're not going to be directly related to simplicity, but more so the application, I guess you could say, related to simplicity. Because as a Christian, I think that it's really vital that we take a look at the church and we focus on the church, because that is the institution that is going to lead you towards the good and the simple life, or it ought to. And so Eller, as well as the other author that I'm going to read from, are going to critique the church in some ways pretty heavily, because the church often fails at doing what it ought to do. So they're going to critique it, but then they're going to provide you with an alternate way to kind of have that community. And that ultimately is the way that things ought to be. If you were here for the propaganda season, the propaganda slayer that I identified, the thing which I think is the fighter of propaganda, is going to be community. And in a future season that I'm planning at the moment, dealing with evil and suffering and all that kind of stuff, there are a lot of streams of thought which identify most suffering as isolation. Whether it's somebody who sins against other people is isolating themselves from community, right? They're cutting people off. They're treating people as objects. They're focusing on self to the detriment of other, right? So it's isolating. So ultimately, most of the time, what is good is going to be that which is communal, and what is evil or what produces suffering or complexity are going to be things that are non-communal. And so as a Christian, of course, the community at the heart of it all is going to be the church. And so a couple of the works that we're going to deal with are going to be related to that, to the idea of community. What is that? Because I think it's not just important that we understand the concept of simplicity intellectually, but that we understand how we start to put those things into practice. And we can't do it by ourselves. That's just not the way that it works. If Christianity is correct, that's not the way that it works. And I think if modern psychology is correct, that's not the way that it works. We need community. Isolation and loneliness are big problems for humanity. So in today's work, we're just going to go through the very first part of Eller's The Simple Life, which deals directly with the concept of simplicity. Eller, I still don't really know that much about him, but he was an interesting guy from what little I do know. You can go to the place that I'm going to pull this work from is House Church Central, and they've got pretty much all of Eller's works, as far as I can tell, online for free. They offer it for free, and I'll read a little snippet here in just a little bit, but they say that you can reproduce this material as long as you credit them and don't change anything. So you can go online and you can get this stuff for free, and it's fantastic. I mean, Eller, he wrote for like Mad Magazine, which is kind of crazy. He wrote about simplicity. He wrote about the church. He wrote about Christian anarchism. He wrote about sex. He wrote about a wide variety of topics. It's fascinating. And one of the things that I found really fascinating about him was that I'd never heard of the guy before, but I just came across him. I forget where I heard his name from. Maybe it was Cody Cook or something. But Eller was referenced, and so I kind of got latched onto him and started to read him. And I was like, this is fascinating. And I just thought he was kind of some obscure person. But then just a couple weeks ago, I was actually reading Jacques Ellul, one of his works on the state or anarchism, and he references Bernard Eller. I was like, man, that's crazy, because in my mind, Ellul is like, somebody who's extremely renowned in the intellectual community, and so I find that he is actually quoting Eller. He's been influenced by Eller, so that was fascinating to me. So Eller was influential. He was interesting. He seems like a really eclectic and genuine guy, and I've enjoyed going through his works, and hopefully you'll enjoy going through this one as well. So I'm going to start reading this week, and I will provide a commentary at the end, just a short little set of ideas that I pull from the content, and we'll talk about it. And that's how the rest of the chapters will go. I'll read, and then I'll expound just a little bit. So before I get on, just note that this comes from House Church Central. This publication was originally published by Abingdon Press, Nashville, 1971. Some material has been added by the author. This work may be freely reproduced and distributed, provided that no changes are made, no revenues are collected beyond the nominal cost of media, and credit is given to the author and House Church Central. Any other use requires the written permission of the author. Citing this material on other internet sites is encouraged, but is to be done only by providing a hypertext reference to this file on this server. Bible selections are from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, copyright 1989, by the Division of Christian Education of the National Council of the Churches of Christ in the USA, used by permission, all rights reserved. All right, you can find a link to this in the show notes as well. So here it is, The Simple Life by Bernard Eller. Chapter 1. If it's the simple life, why does it have to be so complicated? Simply put, it's the life, and that being so, one would think that the book about it could be simple as well. By the simple life, we are going to start saying now and continue saying until the very end, we mean to designate that stance toward possessions and things that was recommended, taught, and practiced by Jesus. Only this and nothing other than this, even though something other might seem to qualify under the rubric. This is to say that our entire discussion will assume the Christian orientation of both author and reader and take place within that context. No opinion will be expressed regarding what values or possibilities there might be in a non-Christian simple life. A book on that subject could be written, and many have been, but this is not one of them. Our interest is the Christian understanding of the simple life. One may say, and such a qualification should have the effect of making the discussion just that much more simple. It does, and the Christian doctrine of the simple life would be simplicity itself, except 1. If we let it get too simple, we won't have the wherewithal for a book. 2. The Christian teaching is by nature dialectical. 3. The people who are supposed to be following the teachings are human beings. The dialectic of the simple life. This matter of dialectics is going to be with us all the way, so let us get it well in hand right here at the beginning. Thinking becomes dialectical when it finds itself being pulled two ways at once. when it finds it necessary to give weight and attention to two different and apparently opposed poles of thought. The best picture of dialectic I can propose is a demonstration seen frequently in appliance and department stores. The store wants to call to attention to its vacuum cleaners, and so rigs one with the hose pointed upward and the machine turned to blow. In the jet of air above the nozzle rides a ping-pong ball, dancing imponderably in space. Actually, the ball is caught in the balance between two opposing forces. Gravity is at work to pull it down. But when the ball gives way to that gravity and does come down, this brings it that much closer to the source of the air jet, which has the effect of blowing it up. Yet when the ball assents to that force and goes up, it quickly goes out of range to the point where gravity takes over again and pulls it back down. For those who appreciate a bit of sophistication in their theology, it can be said that it is the Bernoulli principle that keeps the ball from slipping out sideways. In theology, then, it is the sin principle that enables people to slip out sideways, which is why so many more people than ping-pong balls are lost, and physics is so much more of an exact science than theology is. Plainly, the ball is not fixed in place, but can stay in place only as long as it continues dancing in and out of place. Thought, or action, that operates out of this sort of dynamic tension, giving attention to one truth in such a way that attention must then immediately be given to its counterpart. This is what we mean by dialectic. Of course, the simple life is by no means the only dialectical teaching to be found in Christianity, and indeed we will discover several different dialectics operating within the simple life itself. However, the most central one is this. Essentially, the simple life is the believer's inner relationship to God's, finding expression in his outward relationship to things. This is what might be called a weighted dialectic, in that it clearly is the first pole that takes priority, is determinative and all-controlling, and is in fact the source that gives rise to the second pole. Yet even though the pole of outward expression is secondary, it is absolutely essential. This is a true dialectic. If someone were to claim that the simple life is that life which wants to go all the way with the inner relationship to God, and so deny the need for appropriate outward expression, that would be proof enough that the inner relationship itself lacks probity. But on the other hand, there is no sort of outward expression that, in and of itself, can be taken as proof that the inner relationship is true. There is no alternative but to keep both elements in view simultaneously. At every step, our consideration of the simple life must dance back and forth between the inner relationship to God and the outward relationship to things, each move toward one pole calling for a corrective move toward the other. A simple life parable of Kierkegaard. The plan for this book called for Søren Kierkegaard to be brought into play only in the second part. But because he has a parable that gets to the very heart of what Christianity understands by the simple life, and because it is so beautifully underlining the point we are making, we have chosen to give him a piece of action here. Quote, "When the prosperous man on a dark but starlit night drives comfortably in his carriage and has the lantern lighted, then he is safe. He fears no difficulty. He carries his light with him, and it is not dark close around him. But precisely because he has the lanterns lighted, and has a strong light close to him, precisely for this reason he cannot see the stars, for his lights obscure the stars, which the poor peasant driving without lights can see gloriously in the day, but starry night. So those deceived ones live in the temporal existence. Either occupied with the necessities of life, they are too busy to avail themselves of the view, or in their prosperity and good days they have, as it were, lanterns lighted and close about them. Everything is so satisfactory, so pleasant, so comfortable, but the view is lacking, the prospect, the view of the stars." End quote. Clearly, the view of the stars here intends one's awareness and enjoyment of God, which is, of course, an inner relationship. Yet notice that the intensity of lantern light cannot be equated simply with a person's financial worth. Kierkegaard elsewhere specifies that one's concern over what may be the little he owns, or for that matter, his concern over precisely that which he does not own but would like to, these concerns can be just as obstructive of the star view as can the actual owning itself. Likewise, the parable does not necessarily demand the extinguishing of each and every carriage lantern. From one source or another, the horse needs at least enough light to see where they are going. And in our day and age, if not in Kierkegaard's, the law would require enough of a running light to keep the carriage from being run down. And even more so with the simple life than with the carriage, it will be completely impossible to set down a hard, fast, universally applicable law as to how much lantern light is contributive and how much constitutes an obscuring of the view. And then consider that the extinguishing of lantern in and of itself in no way ensures that the writer will in fact catch the view of the stars. There always is the possibility that he may keep his face only to the ground. There just is no outward arrangement that can stand as a guarantee of the inner relationship. Actually, the matter probably will want to go both ways. The writer catches a glimpse of the stars, which moves him to blow out his lantern, and the dousing of the lantern served to enhance his view of the stars. This is what is meant to be dialectical. The complex versus the complicated. But that the doctrine of the simple life is by nature dialectical means only that the concept is complex rather than simple, in the technical meaning of those terms. It is not to say that either the understanding or the practice of it must be complicated. That is true. The complicating aspect comes in the fact that the understanding and practice have to be accomplished by human beings. And because of their profound comprehension of and stalwart adherence to the sin principle, the first thing that has to be said about human beings is that, if they possibly can find a way of working things to their own advantage, they will do it. So someone will say, okay, you say that the essence of the simple life is an inner relationship. I'll buy that. I've got the relationship. I love God like nobody's business, and it is nobody's business but mine. You can't say that I don't love God. You've already admitted that there are no outward signs that can prove whether or not one has a view of the stars, and I'm telling you that I see them. So get off my back about my standard of living. I don't own anything but what I need, and I'm just as good a Christian as anyone else. And by the way, what kind of car is that you drive? The dialectic of the simple life leaves itself wide open for misuse by those who want credit for living it, but who are in no way inclined to change their style of life. But the misuse can go the other way just as easily. All right, the simple life involves a particular manner and level of living. Very good. You just define that way of life for me. Put it down in a 1, 2, 3 order, and I will set about conforming to those standards. Of course, once I have done it, I will expect you to recognize the achievement and credit me as the righteous Christian I am. After all, what would be the sense of making all these sacrifices unless I get something in return? So the dialectic of the simple life also leaves itself wide open for misuse by the sort of legalism and works righteousness that would earn credit for living it, without even realizing what it means to have a view of the stars. Complaint is always possible. It's got to be one way or the other. You say which, and we'll be happy to go along, but you've got to make up your mind. If the simple life is an inner attitude, we'll play it that way. If it is a visible and concrete mode of life, we'll operate accordingly. But come on, you've got to say which. It is the universal human ingenuity at taking advantage of a situation, including the double-endedness of a dialectic, that makes the simple life so complicated. In the same way, it makes complicated the writing of this book. When I rush over to shut off the escape hatch at one end of the dialectic, that inevitably leaves unguarded the hatch at the other end. But to run back to that end necessarily is to desert this end. If we come down too strongly on the simple life as inner relationship, we say something false. But if we emphasize it as being an outward mode of living, we also say something false. This subject isn't going to be easy, so I beg my readers to be as helpful as they can. Our purpose is not simply to help us think dialectically, or to comprehend a dialectical thesis. It is to help us, you, the reader, and me, the writer, feel, act, and be like a dancing ping-pong ball regarding our own manner of life. This means that we need to become suspicious of ourselves, particularly when we feel complacent about the style in which we are living, or to which we aspire. Most of all, We need to suspect ourselves whenever there arises an urge to escape the tension and flee to either one pole or the other as a means of justifying ourselves and our chosen way of life. I will confess that the writing of this book makes me uncomfortable. I hope that you are willing to share the dialectical discomfort with me. Finally, a word should be said to the effect that this leaving of itself wide open for misuse is not a defect, nor is it anything unique to the doctrine of the simple life. It is a hallmark of the gospel itself. After all, that gospel centers upon a Savior who is absurdly easy to crucify. It has to do with the free grace of God that, as Bonhoeffer pointed out, so easily can be misused as cheap grace. Yet this is the way the gospel was meant to be. This leaving of himself vulnerable to misuse is a mark of God's great love towards us. And the goal of that love is that, through it, we, each and all of us, someday will come to desert the ways of misuse and learn instead to live out the view, the prospect, the view of the stars. And you can tell, probably, why Eller is so influential for me. I mean, I've been talking about Bonhoeffer for a while. I got on Kierkegaard right around the time I started getting on Eller, but Bonhoeffer and Kierkegaard were two big ones for me. And right there in that introduction, Bernard Eller is quoting both of them, and just the way that he writes is so beautiful. He uses analogies, and he writes very pastorally, very compassionately. And you see that a little bit at the end there, where he says, each and all of us someday will come to desert the ways of misuse and learn instead to live out the view, the prospect, the view of the stars. Right? Each and all of us. What does he mean by that? Well, Bernard Eller was a hopeful universalist, maybe a universalist. So that's really interesting as well. His view of the Father's love, similar to George MacDonald's, perhaps. And that's something that somebody that I've been working with is going to be addressing here in, I guess, about a year's time. So that'll be a topic for later. But right now, it's ringing. It's ringing around in my mind. And so, reading this introduction of Eller, it hits on so many levels. It's awesome. Anyway, if I was gonna just try to summarize here what you need to take out of Eller's introduction, it is that this topic of simplicity isn't so simple. And it is simple in some ways, but in the way of application, it's very difficult, because we as humans, we like to game the system, and we want to figure out how do we make it work to our advantage. And what Eller says is this is really a dialectic, and he uses the example of the ping pong ball in the vacuum, right? The tension between gravity and the force of the air, Bernoulli's principle there. And there's going to be a tension, and we don't like that tension. We don't like ambiguity, and maybe you don't even call it ambiguity because gravity is pretty clear. Air pressure is pretty clear, right? They're two very clear things, but how those things meet in that point where the tension equalizes, that's the challenge, right? So Eller wants you to recognize that challenge, that throughout this book, he's gonna try to be going back and forth, trying to balance the scales, trying to push on one tension and recognizing that the other one's gonna go up, and then running over and pushing down that tension. And that's something that we need to struggle with. This tension between like a legalism and trying to just say that, well, you have to do this and get rid of this and do that, and as well as like licentiousness, oh, well, my inner relationship with God is great. It doesn't matter what the outside looks like. So there's going to be that tension going through the whole book. So hopefully this prepares you to kind of struggle, be open to that, embrace it, not try to quell it, and also recognize that you're not going to be ending up one way or the other, but you're going to end up with, hopefully, an equalized tension that works the gospel within you and leads you to accept the grace of God and show that grace to others, and hopefully live that grace and love out in your life. So I'm excited to get into the rest of Eller's work. That's all for now. So peace, and because I'm a pacifist, when I say it, I mean it. This podcast is a part of the Kingdom Outpost Network. Please check out the links below to find other great podcasts and content related to nonviolence and kingdom living.